Hi, I'm Randy Agert, and this is for the class Bad Words and Taboo Terms. This is the 7th in a series of video lectures on the taxonomy of taboo words. We're talking about mortology this time, and again, this is a word that you probably haven't heard used much before because, again, I made it up. And again, this is a class that everybody agrees is important in the world's languages, taboo words related to death. If we go back in history of English, this was fairly common. So, for example, dangerous diseases like the plague became taboo words. And you can understand that people didn't want to talk about things that would kill you, a plague. But even today, we find that this is fairly common. So, for example, in the 1980s, the word AIDS was really a taboo word. People didn't talk about AIDS. It wasn't until there was a series of billboards that were trying to educate people about AIDS that it became common to see it in public. Up until that point, it was one of those things that you kind of whispered about. Likewise, we find in certain contexts, the word dead might be taboo, right? A doctor's not going to say that your loved one is dead. They're going to find a nicer euphemism, like passed on. We find in obituaries that cancer is not a word that shows up. Usually what they'll say is after a prolonged illness. And it's interesting, I had a friend some years ago who was diagnosed with cancer, and he observed to me that people didn't like to say the word in front of him. And so they would find ways of avoiding it. They would say, so how are you, how is your, how are your treatments going, right? So that they didn't have to actually say cancer. So these things do become taboo. Now, in other languages, it's a little bit more systematized. So we find that in many languages, this category, this class, overlaps with another class, appellati, which has to do with proper names. So that in many cultures of the world, we find that when somebody dies, then their name becomes taboo, and you can't say their name for a certain amount of time. It may be for several years, it may be for several generations. It depends on the culture and the language. But so we do find that death has many language taboos associated with it, and those taboos may overlap with other classes, especially with appellati.